HOA fined me for unapproved cars, not knowing I secretly owned 67% of the community. The email arrived with no subject, but it was from the HOA, my gut twisted into a cold knot. After years of enduring our HOA's tyrannical reign, they'd finally gone too far, doubling my fees because of too many cars in my damn driveway. What they didn't know, what smug, clipboard-wielding Karen Sterling could never have imagined, was that I'd been silently buying up this neighborhood, brick by painstaking brick, for years. Now, it was time for a reckoning. Would Karen, our power-hungry HOA president, accept defeat with any grace when I revealed the shocking truth of who owned this community? Welcome to my channel. Subscribe for more tales of HOA nightmares and Karen-induced chaos. I never asked for a war with our HOA. I kept my head down, paid my dues, and tried to ignore the petty tyranny. But last Tuesday morning, that all changed when I found a fluorescent orange notice plastered to my front door, an act of blatant aggression. My blood ran cold as I read the words. Immediate fee increase, $500 monthly. Violation, excessive vehicles on property. 3 cars. That's all it boiled down to. My reliable work truck, vital for my construction business. My wife Olivia's sturdy SUV, essential for her grueling hospital shifts. And the cherry red Honda we'd proudly bought for our daughter's sweet 16 just last month. 3 perfectly ordinary cars parked in our freaking driveway. A wave of fury pulsed through me as I watched through the kitchen window. There she was, Karen Sterling, our HOA president, conducting her daily inspection with the zeal of a seasoned drill sergeant. Her perfectly manicured hand clutched a pink clipboard and a menacing measuring tape. She paused at my driveway, her lips pursed in disdain, and pulled out her phone. Snap. 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 Another barrage of photographic evidence. This was the 3rd time this week. Honey, she's out there again. Olivia called from the living room, her voice laced with weary resignation. Maybe we should just park the Honda in the garage? No, I said, my voice a low growl as I slammed my coffee cup down. We're not hiding our daughter's car like we're criminals. The garage is packed with Olivia's medical supplies and my equipment, exactly like we explained at that sham of an HOA meeting. That meeting. The memory replayed in my mind, sharp and infuriating. The way Karen had smirked, a cold glint in her eyes, as I desperately tried to explain our perfectly reasonable situation. Rules are rules, Mr. Thompson, she drawled, not even bothering to look up from her phone. Maybe if you can't afford proper garage storage, this neighborhood isn't for you. The veiled insult cut deep, a reminder of her constant condescension. What Karen didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been quietly, meticulously buying up properties in this development for the past 5 years, each purchase a calculated step in a plan she couldn't even fathom. I used my real estate investment company, obscuring my involvement with a web of different LLC names. It had started as a sound investment strategy, a way to diversify my assets, but over time, it had become something more, a simmering desire for retribution. I walked outside to get the mail, deliberately moving with agonizing slowness. Karen pretended to inspect Mrs. Agnes's prize-winning rose bushes, but I saw her watching me from the corner of her eye. Poor Mrs. Agnes had been slapped with a ludicrous fine last month for having roses that were too vibrant and disrupting neighborhood color harmony. The sheer audacity of it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my lawyer. Property closing complete. You now own 67% of the development. A slow smile spread across my face as I tucked the phone away, savoring the moment. Karen Power walked toward me, her designer heels clicking like a ticking clock on the pristine sidewalk. Her clipboard was clutched possessively to her chest, a weapon of bureaucratic warfare. Mr. Thompson, she called out, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. I trust you received our notice regarding the vehicle violation? I did, Karen, I replied, keeping my voice calm and level. And I have some serious questions about the legal basis for this fee increase. She waved her hand dismissively, as if swatting away a bothersome fly. The board has full authority to implement fees as needed. Perhaps if you attended more meetings, you'd understand how these things work. Her smile didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. Little did she know, I'd attended every single meeting for the past 5 years, lurking in the shadows through proxy representatives who owned the other houses. I'd sat back and documented every one of Karen's selective enforcements, every questionable fee, every blatant abuse of power. My evidence was a ticking time bomb, waiting to detonate. As she turned to leave, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm of arrogance, she tossed a parting shot over her shoulder. Oh, and the board is calling an emergency meeting tonight. 7 p.m. sharp. We'll be discussing additional measures regarding problem properties. The problem properties bit was delivered with enough venom to make my skin crawl. I watched her walk away, a storm of fury brewing inside me. Then I pulled out my phone and texted my lawyer. Time to prepare those documents we discussed. Karen's making her move tonight. My daughter's car pulled into the driveway just then, and I saw Karen stop dead in her tracks, her eyes gleaming with malicious glee as she snapped more photos. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to remain calm. Tonight would change everything in this neighborhood. But first, I had some calls to make. I went inside and spread out the property maps on my desk, each lot carefully highlighted and coded. 5 years of meticulous planning, of painstakingly building evidence, of silently watching Karen's reign of HOA terror grow worse. Tonight, she would learn that her biggest mistake wasn't just targeting my family. It was underestimating exactly who she was dealing with. My phone rang. It was Mrs. Agnes from across the street, her voice trembling as she sobbed about another violation notice, this time for having a slightly cracked bird bath. As I listened to her heartbreaking story, I glanced at the framed photo on my wall, my father, standing proud in front of his first house, before an HOA's relentless harassment had forced him to sell at a devastating loss 20 years ago. My father had taught me to play the long game, to fight smart instead of angry, to never let bullies win. I looked at my watch. 6 hours until the meeting, 6 hours to prepare for war. Karen wanted to play hardball over a few cars in a driveway? She had no idea what was coming. The air in the community center crackled with tension as I walked into the meeting room. Every seat was filled with neighbors, their faces etched with anxiety and resentment. They sat shoulder to shoulder, whispering amongst themselves. Karen had outdone herself this time. She'd even hired a professional photographer to take pictures of my driveway from multiple angles, distorting the perspective to make 3 normal-sized cars look like some kind of illegal parking lot. Let's begin, Karen announced, her voice sharp and imperious as she tapped her sparkly pink gavel on the podium. She'd deliberately called this emergency meeting on a Tuesday evening, knowing full well that most working families would struggle to attend. But I'd made sure to be there, sitting quietly in the back row, watching her put on her usual charade. As you can see from these professional photographs, she began, clicking through her PowerPoint presentation with a self-satisfied smirk. Mr. Thompson's property has become a used car lot. A few gasps rippled through her loyal followers in the front row, the same ones whose Christmas decorations stayed up until March without any repercussions. I glanced around the room, noting the expressions on my neighbors' faces. Mrs. Maria, my elderly neighbor, rolled her eyes. She'd been fined last month for having her grandson's car in her driveway while he helped repair her roof. Mr. Arthur, the high school science teacher, was furiously taking notes. He'd received a violation notice for parking his car slightly over his driveway line during the last snowstorm. The blatant hypocrisy was sickening. Karen clicked to the next slide, showing a zoomed-in photo of my daughter's car. This vehicle here has been parked in the same spot for over 48 hours. She conveniently failed to mention that it was because my daughter was home from college for the weekend, a rare and precious visit. The meeting dragged on, each minute a fresh assault on common sense and decency. Karen presented her evidence, elaborate charts showing supposed property value decreases, complaints from anonymous neighbors, undoubtedly her cronies, and even weather reports suggesting my cars were creating excess snowdrifts on the street. The absurdity was breathtaking. Furthermore, She continued, pulling out a thick binder with a dramatic flourish. I've documented every instance of vehicles entering and leaving Mr. Thompson's property over the past 3 months. My eyebrows shot up. She'd been tracking my family's movements? That crossed a line. Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Olivia Jenkins, my next-door neighbor, finally stood up, her face flushed with indignation. Karen, isn't this a bit excessive? They're just regular cars in a regular driveway. Karen's face contorted in a mask of fury as she snapped. You're out of order. You haven't been recognized by the chair. I watched as Karen's husband, Walter, started handing out copies of a new proposed bylaw, one that would limit each household to 2 vehicles and require garage parking only. The injustice of it all almost made me laugh. Almost. This was personal. We'll now vote on the new vehicle restrictions and fee increase, Karen declared, not even bothering to allow any discussion. All in favor? That was my cue. I stood up slowly, straightening my tie, a sense of quiet determination settling over me. Point of order, Madam President. Karen's eyes narrowed as she peered at me over her reading glasses, her face a picture of barely suppressed irritation. You are not recognized, Mr. Thompson. Actually, I said, my voice resonating with quiet authority, as I pulled out my folder. According to HOA Bylaw Section 7.3, any property owner may raise a point of order regarding voting procedures. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on me. I could see Karen's perfectly manicured nails gripping the podium tighter, her knuckles white. Before we vote, I continued, I believe it's important to review the HOA's current property ownership structure. I started walking toward the front of the room, my shoes clicking purposefully on the linoleum floor. You see, over the past 5 years, Sunrise Properties has been acquiring homes in this development. Karen's face started to lose its color, the smugness replaced by a dawning realization. I pulled out a large property map, a visual representation of my carefully orchestrated plan. And as CEO of Sunrise Properties, I said, pausing for dramatic effect, I thought it might interest everyone to know exactly who owns the majority of this HOA. I paused, making eye contact with each board member, savoring their growing unease. But perhaps we should discuss that after we review these questionable surveillance activities you've been conducting. The room erupted in murmurs, a wave of suppressed anger finally breaking free. Through my peripheral vision, I could see phones coming out, neighbors recording every moment, hungry for justice. Karen's hand trembled as she reached for her water bottle, knocking over her precious gavel in the process, a symbolic shattering of her authority. That's when Walter rushed to the podium, whispering frantically in Karen's ear. Her eyes widened, her face paling as she finally grasped the full scope of what was happening, who she'd been messing with all these years. The meeting room fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. I stood tall, my heart pounding in my chest, but my voice remained steady, unwavering. Karen's smug smile had completely vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated fear. Before we vote on these new fees, I said, my voice cutting through the silence, I have something important to share with everyone. I clicked open my briefcase and removed a thick stack of property deeds, laying them one by one on the table. Each paper represented another piece of my secret plan, coming together with breathtaking precision. The room buzzed with whispers as I arranged them in neat rows, a tangible display of my power. For the past 5 years, I continued, my gaze sweeping across the room, I've watched this HOA board ignore serious maintenance issues while harassing good neighbors over the most trivial matters. I've seen Karen here harass Mrs. Agnes, who's 82 years old, for having a flower pot that was 1 inch too tall, while her friend Susan's bright purple fence somehow never got a single warning. Karen's face turned crimson, her composure crumbling. That's not true. I enforce all rules fairly. She grabbed her water bottle, but her hand was shaking so much she spilled some on her designer blouse, a visible sign of her unraveling. I pulled up photos on the meeting room's big screen, projecting images of Karen's hypocrisy for all to see. Here's Karen measuring my grass at 3 a.m. last Tuesday. The security camera footage was crystal clear, a damning indictment of her obsessive behavior. And here she is ignoring Thompson's violations completely, right after they hired her son's landscaping company. More whispers filled the room, a chorus of outrage and vindication. I could see people starting to nod, remembering their run-ins with Karen's selective enforcement, her petty vindictiveness. But the most interesting thing I discovered, I said, picking up the stack of deeds and holding them aloft, is that through my company, Sunrise Properties, I now own 67% of the homes in this development. I paused, letting the meaning sink in, savoring the moment of revelation. That makes me the majority owner of the HOA itself. Karen jumped up, knocking over her chair in her panic. You can't do that! It's not allowed! Her voice had gone shrill, almost hysterical. I smiled calmly, a sense of quiet triumph washing over me. I can. I've had 3 different law firms review everything. It's completely legal. I pulled out another folder, the final piece of my carefully constructed trap. I also have signed complaints from 32 residents about harassment, selective enforcement, and suspicious fees. The room erupted, a cacophony of voices rising in protest. Mrs. Agnes stood up, her voice shaking with emotion. Last winter, they fined me $200 for not shoveling my walkway fast enough. I was in the hospital with pneumonia. Others joined in, sharing their stories of Karen's tyranny, her abuse of power. Karen tried to restore order, banging her gavel, but nobody was listening to her anymore. Her reign was over. I moved to dissolve the current board, I announced, my voice ringing with authority. We'll hold new elections with term limits and clear rules about conflict of interest. No more 3 a.m. grass measuring, no more selective enforcement. Walter Arthur from 2 doors down raised his hand. I second that motion. Soon, hands were going up all around the room, a collective act of defiance against Karen's years of oppression. Karen grabbed her designer purse and started toward the door, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. This meeting is adjourned, she yelled, her voice cracking with desperation. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Actually, I said, still calm, still in control. According to HOA Bylaws Section 7.3, you need a majority vote to adjourn, and I don't think you have that anymore. I gestured at the deeds spread across the table, a stark reminder of her diminished power. We're just getting started. She froze with her hand on the doorknob, the realization dawning on her that her power was slipping away, that 20 years of ruling the neighborhood with an iron fist were coming to an end. Now, I said, opening another folder, let's talk about those mysterious pool renovation fees from last summer, the ones where $50,000 disappeared, but the pool never got fixed. I have some interesting bank records to share. Karen slumped against the wall, her face pale, her eyes wide with panic. She hadn't noticed yet, but a local news van had just pulled into the parking lot, its headlights illuminating her downfall. I'd invited them to cover our community reorganization meeting, knowing that the exposure would be the final nail in her coffin. The next few hours would change our neighborhood forever. But first, we had years of Karen's secrets to uncover, years of injustice to rectify. And I had every single receipt, every damning document, every piece of evidence I needed to bring her reign of terror to an end. My careful planning was finally paying off, and the best part, the sweetest victory, was still to come. Monday morning, my lawyer's office felt like a war room. 20 angry voicemails from Karen screamed from my phone. She'd discovered my company's property records over the weekend, ranting about a secret takeover. I savored her panic. That evening, she went door to door, spreading wild rumors of turning our serene suburb into a parking lot and forging documents linking me to a shadowy developer. I knew I had to move swiftly. My security cameras caught Karen sneaking onto my property at midnight, snapping close-ups of my car's license plates. The next day, she filed a lawsuit, claiming I'd broken HOA rules with my company's purchases and demanding an emergency freeze on my voting rights. This was the moment my months of planning truly paid off. My lawyer unleashed our secret weapon, a meticulously compiled record of every HOA meeting for the past 5 years. We played videos of Karen giving her friends passes on violations while harshly fining others. We showed checks proving she'd used HOA funds to renovate her backyard. The courtroom gasped as we played emails where she boasted about using her power to keep undesirable elements out of the neighborhood. The judge's eyes widened as we showed time-stamped footage of her measuring my grass with a ruler at 3 a.m., taking photos of my teenage daughter's car, and placing threatening notes on neighbors' doors. Her lawyer sweated as we presented proof she'd altered HOA records to hide her friends' unpaid dues. But the real bombshell came when 3 former board members stepped forward. They testified about Karen's bullying tactics, admitting she'd pressured them into approving unfair rules, targeted homeowners she disliked, and brazenly used HOA fines to fund her annual trips to Hawaii. The courtroom fell silent as we showed Karen's social media posts mocking elderly residents who couldn't pay their fees. There she was, poolside in Maui, with the caption, "Thanks to all my rule-breaking neighbors for funding this vacation. Keep those violations coming." Karen tried to defend herself, claiming she was just doing her job. But then, we played the recording from last month's HOA meeting where she'd screamed at Mrs. Agnes, our 75-year-old neighbor, for having a bird feeder that was 2 inches too low. That's when Karen finally snapped. She leaped from her seat, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He's trying to destroy our perfect neighborhood," she shrieked. "Do you know what kind of people will move in if we don't have strict rules? He probably wants to turn this into one of those communities where people can park wherever they want." The judge had heard enough. He not only dismissed Karen's lawsuit but ordered a full audit of the HOA's finances. As we left the courthouse, my phone exploded with texts from neighbors. They'd all received a mass email from Karen announcing her immediate resignation, claiming she was being forced out by big money interests. I watched her storm to her car, already typing furiously on her phone. This wasn't over. Karen still had loyal followers in the neighborhood, and she wasn't the type to admit defeat easily. But for now, I had what I needed: irrefutable proof that our HOA president had been abusing her power for years and the legal authority to make real change. The morning of the final court hearing began with a media circus. Karen had orchestrated an army of news vans to descend upon my house, hoping public pressure would force me to back down. But she had only gifted me the perfect stage. I straightened my tie, grabbed my documents, and walked directly to the reporters, a confident smile on my face. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Ethan Thompson, and I'd love to show you something interesting about our HOA's financial records." I unfurled the color-coded spreadsheets my accountant had prepared, revealing years of suspicious fees that always seemed to funnel into projects benefiting Karen's closest friends. The reporter's eyes lit up as I explained how Karen had charged single parents higher violation fees than her golf buddies. One reporter audibly gasped when I showed the security footage of Karen measuring my grass at 3 a.m., while her yard violated every rule in the book. Inside the courthouse, Karen sat stiffly with her expensive lawyer, her signature fake pearl necklace gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights and smug smile plastered on her face, unaware of what was coming. But that smile vanished when our lawyer began presenting our evidence. We showed photos of Karen's own house, riddled with rule-breaking, her bright purple mailbox, her overgrown garden, and her son's 4 cars parked on the street. The judge leaned forward when we revealed Karen's secret Facebook group where she bragged about targeting certain families. "Let's see how long the Thompsons last with these new fees," she'd written. "Maybe they'll finally move and sell to someone more suitable." Karen leaped to object, but froze when we played the recording from last week's pool party. Her voice rang clear through the courtroom. "Of course, I make up violations. How else can we control who lives here?" The judge's gavel slammed down hard. Not only was Karen removed from the HOA board, but she had to pay back every unfair fee she'd collected. The look on her face when she heard the total, $147,892, was more satisfying than any revenge I could have imagined. I used my majority ownership to establish a new HOA board with a revolutionary difference. We elected 5 residents from diverse corners of the neighborhood, including Mrs. Maria, whom Karen had targeted for cooking ethnic food. and Mr. Arthur, whose beautiful garden Karen had deemed too exotic. The changes came swiftly and dramatically. Kids could now play basketball in their driveways. Gardens could grow vegetables, not just flowers. And yes, families could park more than 2 cars as long as they fit within their own space. 3 weeks later, I watched through my window as Karen's moving truck lumbered into the driveway. She'd sent a final, venomous letter to everyone, claiming she was relocating to a better neighborhood with higher standards. The irony wasn't lost on anyone when her new HOA's parking ticket was conspicuously stuck to her windshield as she drove away. My daughter parked her car in our driveway that evening, nestled safely beside my work truck and my wife's SUV. I put up a small sign, a symbol of our hard-won victory. "Welcome to Thompson Hills, where good neighbors make good neighborhoods." We had all voted on it as a community. The next morning, I received an unexpected call. A TV producer, captivated by the news coverage, wanted to film a documentary about our HOA transformation. As I gazed out at children playing freely in their yards and neighbors chatting amicably over garden fences, I smiled, picturing Karen seething in her new house, bound by its 1-car garage rule. The sweetest part? Our property values soared by 15% in the first month after Karen's departure. It turned out, people genuinely preferred living in a neighborhood where they were treated with respect rather than ruled by fear. Some of Karen's former cronies even stopped by to apologize, admitting they'd been terrified of becoming her next target. We still have an HOA, but now it protects the neighborhood instead of policing it. Every month, we use the fees for projects that genuinely matter, improving the playground, repairing the pool, and assisting elderly residents with home maintenance. We even started a community garden in the very spot where Karen used to take her yard violation photos. As I filed away the last of the court documents, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Karen's new neighborhood watch group. They were desperately seeking advice on how to deal with their own power-hungry HOA president. I leaned back in my chair, a sense of profound satisfaction washing over me. Sometimes, the most potent revenge isn't revenge at all. It's empowering others to stand up for themselves, to reclaim their communities, and to build a world where kindness and respect triumph over tyranny and fear. Hopefully, these revisions capture the essence of the original story while amplifying the engagement through heightened emotions, vivid imagery, and more compelling pacing.